said. So we want to be able to predict revenue. We want to know what revenue is expected in the future, and to be able to almost detect non-compliance at the point that it happens. So that if someone is doing their returns today, they're paying their taxes and they pay less than what they're supposed to pay, then we're able to detect that at that point. We also want to use advanced analytics to drive our policies, as I had earlier said. So big data is the next phase. And I think for us in KRA, after the phase of automation, we are getting to the next phase where we are deriving value from data. And big data analytics is the way to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Before I start my conversation, I would like to ask you a question to the audience. How many of you feel comfortable with your understanding of what big data is? I am still struggling with to define and explain what big data is. And I will frame my explanation in three concepts. One is culture, one is tools, and the other is the opportunity. And talking about culture, my experience working for several tax authorities in different countries, and especially for developing economies, I have found that the first challenge is for the tax authority to realize that it is a matter of data, and the tax authority is a tax engine for the country. It's not just using the data for the tributary process, but it is also a matter of getting value for the data to the other organizations in the government and to provide real insights to the economy. So, and the other point is, big data is useful if it is able to provide value to the business. So the question that I have been always struggling is how fast as we are able to really realize the big data tools or resources in order to put the data available to the business. How fast we are, and how can we remove the complexity and we demystify all those complex words around even advanced analytics that is for sure a hot topic for tax authorities. But the first challenge is how can we make the data available for people for running a simple analysis of what are the composition of the taxpayers, to understand how can I make tax segmentations, how can I create a basic risk model, and how can move the data as soon as I read the data, put the data available on the business. So in order to do that, we need to remove the complexity of big data. And what I say, the culture is that big data, end of the day, is just a tool. It has been in the industry since several years ago. So what is the opportunity with the technology? That the new digital technologies are democratizing that complex technology, so small companies and governments can use that complex technology in a more easy way. So that means that the first challenge in terms of culture for the tax authority is to adopt the concept of being the tax engine of the country, and second, to demystify and remove the complexity of big data so we can provide business value and to provide the data to the business so you can start using the data. The other thing is about tools. In my experience working with some countries in developing economies, if you think what are the sources of data, you will realize that the standard source is those traditional tax forms that we put in front of the taxpayers to fill a declaration. And the nature of the process is a structured data. When you start thinking that the new tax authorities, the new tax policies are enforcing some new concepts such as the electronic invoicing, just to give you an example, the countries that have massified the electronic invoicing, the 90% of the data is in nature, on a structure, and the 2% is a structure. That means that if all my legacy and all my thinking is considering that I'm going to receive the data in a structured way, it's going to be really difficult to adopt big data. Those countries that I am referring, they are even transforming the nature of the structured data to the format of the structured data because it's more easy to use. It's more easy to analyze, and it is most easy to transform. And let me put a challenge here. Most of the times, when you think about data, it's just to going back to my example of how fast we are for using the data, we collect the data from the traditional voluntary compliance process using a tax form, and we spend from 1 month to 2 months on putting that data available for the business people to use the data. What if I can just start using the data as soon as it arrives? So how can I provide, instead of running a complex advanced analytics, why do not use a real-time analytics to start getting value from the data immediately? So in order to do that, we need to change the thinking of just collecting structured data and considering that the technologies that those companies, such as the social networks, companies such as Facebook, such as Google, Microsoft, what they are doing basically is dealing with data that is coming from different kind of interactions and from citizens, and those interactions are not putting a structured data, but the nature of the interaction is on a structure. So the point here is the tool, big data, is just something that we can use to start moving the data to the entire tributary cycle. Let me give you an example. The tax authorities that are realizing value of big data are using big data not just for advanced analytics, are using the big data for pre-filling the tax forms. So instead of waiting for the taxpayer to fill the tax form, I can process the data really fast. So I can pre-fill the form, and the taxpayer is just going to put okay, I accept my tax proposal, and I just submit the form. So that is an example. The other example is, before jumping to advanced analytics, we need to understand what you have in front, what you have on the data. So we need to enable something that is called data exploration. It's like trying to understand what is the behavior of the taxpayer without moving the complex advanced analytics scenario, but just try to understand what you are collecting from the taxpayers. What are the trends, what are the segments, and then we can be effective implementing some more complex scenarios such as advanced analytics and artificial intelligence. And my third point, that is opportunity, is if you consider the developed countries, more developing countries, they have access to plenty of resources, okay? But that is also, and they have been using technology and big data technology since years ago, expensive technology, but they are struggling because they have a big legacy platform, a big legacy system. That happens in the US, in many other developing economies. And I want to refer to a case in a small country in Latin America. The 100% of the tax declaration process is running on paper. People fill the tax form in paper, and they take the tax form to a kiosk, to a tax office, and there is a lot of people moving the data that is in the paper to the tax system. So the process to start adopting technology that now has been democratized is not so complex now. The opportunity that they have is they can adopt the technology even faster than another tax authority in a developing economy. Why? Because they can start using that technology immediately. So for KRA, the opportunity is that it is more easy to start using that technology because it's more accessible, and because it's more easy to adopt that when you have a strong legacy platform. So that is a matter of opportunity. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think what we are seeing here is a process that goes through different stages. And the first stage that we have seen and has been implemented locally is the first data collection through forms, through information that comes online. There are still some challenges there, but we are now moving, as we have just heard, we are moving into a second stage. The second stage is to collect more data. Apart from that, this information that companies, individuals are filing, we now have all these other sources of data that the revenue authority can have access to. We have heard of structured data. There is a lot of structured data that is there. Unstructured data, that's where we can really talk about big data because the sources and the amount of information vast exceeds the capabilities of the structured databases to handle and manipulate. I would say that I would call that a second stage, is that collection of data. Because from there, little by little, we are now moving to the third stage, which is you have the data, you have the sources, you have accumulated mountains of data. What do we do? And it is a very tough question, okay? I think we have already heard what are the objectives, what we are trying to achieve. We want to become more efficient. We want that situation where a taxpayer comes, connects, and suddenly he's told, look, this is your income, these are your expenses, this is what you are meant to remit. Click yes, okay? In some places, possibly it's already happening. We are not yet there. But that is a good goal, okay? It's, we want to be able to analyze and say, look, these returns here don't make too much sense. Why? Because all this additional data that we have and we have analyzed about this company and that or that individual don't tally, okay? And that's where the real brain work is going to happen. We have here present vendors that have the tools. Again, the tools will help us. The mathematical modeling will help us. But still, we need to have the brains of, okay, what I'm looking for, how can I find these inconsistencies? How can I identify who is likely to be committing fraud? How can I identify what should be my priorities in collecting data, okay? I don't know, I hear a lot, okay, we have to tax the mamamboga, okay, even if it is 20 shillings. Well, I don't know. What about that other company that should be paying several billions and are not paying it, okay? I think the priority of the revenue authority would be to look for the sources where it can get the fastest gains and where we are going to have, I mean, the investment is going to pay much more. And that's what we can get from data. We can get the likelihood of identifying the wrong returns. We can get the likelihood of where the fraud is happening. And we can also set up the priorities, okay? I would say in data analysis, we can go through three processes. The first one is hindsight. We have the data, we know what has happened, and from there, we know what we have to do. But what we are moving now is more into a second level, that is insight. I have the data, what does it tell me? What do I know? And from there we are moving to a third level, that would be foresight, looking at the future. I have the data, what do I need to know? What can I tell about the future where the data is still there? That is what we are looking when we are talking about the analytics. Okay, that is what we want data analytics to tell us. What has happened in the past, what is the meaning of what we have, and what we want to look at the future. What can we predict? What other information we should be looking for and accessing? I think before I finish my presentation, I come from Stanford University. We are an education institution. So to me, the value of academics is I want to bring it up, because if there is one thing that is not only happening in Kenya at the moment, but is a worldwide phenomenon, is we don't have data analysts. So when we have people like IBM or Microsoft coming to sell these wonderful tools, who is going to use them? We have a problem, okay? It's not enough having a car, you have to have a driver, and you have to have the fuel. So the fuel possibly is going to be the data that we are gathering, but we need the drivers, okay? We need to develop local expertise in data analytics. And that is something that I think the Revenue Authority has to promote, as well as many of the other, the business community, okay? We need to create this local knowledge. Because that's where we are moving. We are moving to understand better what is happening. Revenue collection is just one of the many areas. But almost all the other verticals, they need to be able to analyze that data that we have been collecting for years and take us to the next level. Thank you very much.
I was very happy that it's going to take longer before I think of what I'm going to say. But allow me to brag a little bit that last week I was in Washington, D.C., and I went there to speak at the IMF Statistical Conference. And I'm so happy that this came immediately after that conference, because we are not the only ones who are worried about big data. They are worried about big data. They are worried in the sense that new business models or new platforms, digital platforms, are eating into collectible revenue areas. For example, the use of WhatsApp reduces the revenue you could get from the telcos. And the worry is that you cannot capture that in the national accounting. It affects you in the sense that the telcos will not have the revenue to pay to the revenue authorities. Then we have several other platforms, Google, we have YouTubes, you have open source software, all build up into value addition, but you can't see that value addition. You can't account it into the national accounting or the GDP. That's what UN got a couple of experts to think, how do we manage this? And in the end, to cut the long story short, is that some mechanism has to be found how governments can be able to access the big data behind these giants. And I know For example, KRA recently wanted to view financial data on a local telco, and they were not able to see. I have widely written about this, saying that corporations that are in a position to gather personal data, either we must find a way, either they do it philanthropically or through the legal framework, that data must be part of the data that the government and other institutions can be able to visualize in order to assist with respect to data analytics, better visualization of the revenues and other stuff. Because data, the reason why they're hiding this is data has become just like land, labor, capital, a major, one of the major, land is a resource, capital is a resource, data has become a resource. Everybody wants to keep that data. When we launched Kenya Open Data, and I'm very happy that it has taken a shorter period for us to sit here and talk about big data, we were actually thinking about this, and we did not stop there. We moved on to ask security to put cameras across the road networks. We did with IBM. The thinking was that we shouldn't be having police stopping you, asking you whether you have a license. Through machine learning, any vehicle that has not paid KRA should be identified, and when the police go, they know this is a culprit. And at some point, I thought KRA would say, give us all that data. By now, our data would have, our revenue rates would have gone down because they would have collected all revenues. Even fraud would have been stopped through those mechanisms of using the big data that is generated by these cameras you see on the highways. But I'm happy that you're beginning to make machine-readable number plates. And that's one of the ways that you can eliminate a lot of fraud. You can eliminate those who are not able to pay, or those who are not willing to pay taxes. And my appeal is that we shouldn't just come here and talk at the conferences, because I work deeply in big data. I am part of the world, of the global World Data Lab, where we have personalized data. And we are hoping that we will develop products out of there to know individual earnings, such that I cannot take a product to Daktari here if I know that he can't buy that. We have reached a point we know who you can actually sell what product to through estimation of incomes from multiple sources. And this is also happening both from structured and unstructured data. We have a team at Stanford University which has been doing machine learning. And from machine learning, actually they have done like 4,000 products, items. You can be able to determine whether Ndemo can afford a Mercedes. I mean, if you live in a certain area, you live in Kuna, you drive this, you do this, and then there are other several sources of data. It's very easy to do that prediction, and I'm sure KRA probably will be very much interested to know these new ways of data analytics, predictive visualization and stuff. We have so many startups in this country. It's just that we don't have them here, or people don't know, or people are not interested, that are doing predictive work, especially in the agricultural sector, which has been comprehensively dealt with respect to big data, both structured and unstructured. And these are the low-hanging fruits that KRA should be interested in. And it doesn't cost money to get people like us who are paid at the university, even though the salary is small, but we are paid to to just talk and share knowledge. We could come with Daktari here and share with you and say, this is low-hanging, this is whatever, this is available, this is whatnot, and then what kind of legislation we need that these big companies with a lot of data about us, because you need to mash up such data with the data you have to be able to predict how much tax I would pay for the next 2 to 3 years. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
I don't have anything more to say. But since I'm here being paid, well, not being paid to speak, but just here to speak, it's also a very interesting position being here as a taxpayer, as IBM, who is an international company that has a very complex tax strategies that become quite challenging when we come to Kenya and we work with KRA, with them trying to understand transfer pricing and how we operate. And as I think Dr. Savila said, don't go after Mama Boga, go after the big guys doing big. But as the president said yesterday, 2 things. We are encouraging people to come and invest in Kenya, international players. That's a big reason, I'm sure, why Netanyahu was here yesterday. We have to look at what these big companies are going to do when they come here and how they're going to work and what their business models are. And our ease of doing business has improved, as we know. Probably the most improved country in the world is Kenya. But if we want to continue that trajectory, we have to make it even easier. And taxes are a very important thing. So we need to look at the data about the big companies. So the big data challenge with those big companies, how to make it better. The second thing the president said was about East Africa. And if you have an ID, you can live, you can work, you can invest, you can buy land, you can even get married here. So what are the challenges now around big data, not only for Kenya, but for somebody from Rwanda, if they now are going to be in your tax net? So that leads to a policy question. So if you're going to really make this work, you've got to put in the right policies, and all the same constraints hold. That you must be able to address fraud, you must be able to make it simpler, you must be able to improve compliance, right? So that's another challenge that's happening. Dr. Ndembo mentioned the new currencies. I don't want to say it, but imagine Bitcoin, cyber currencies, what's going to happen? It's inevitable. Whatever happens in one part of the world and takes root, it eventually gets to another part of the world, unless you do everything you can to stop it. You can track perhaps payments with M-Pesa. How are you going to track WhatsApp Pay, Facebook Pay, Google Pay, new company, social media application Pay? And people can run their businesses in that way. When it comes to digital currencies, somebody might, currency, what is money? It's really an understanding about IOUs. IOU, and we all agree that this is the price of something, and therefore if I am now trading with Dr. Ndemo using the receipt I got from Brookside for my milk, and that becomes Maziwa coin instead of Bitcoin, how are you going to track that movement as you go through? So it's going to get even more and more challenging, and that kind of data is just going to absolutely explode. So as we're looking at these challenges and we're trying to find out about fraud, there's an old saying that big, I forget how it goes, but people who commit big crimes also commit small crimes. So when the FBI and all these people we watch on TV at night when we should be doing email are looking for crimes, they look for somebody to trip up in just a little bit. So in Dr. Ndemo's example, the cameras can find somebody who hasn't paid their car license, hasn't done this, hasn't done that. When it comes to sharing information around interdepartmental agencies, what can NTSA give you about somebody, and can that person be mocked somehow as someone that can be looked at. So it's very hard sitting here as IBM giving you advice how to collect more money. It's also very hard as a citizen giving you advice about where to even look for money. But if you have an auto pay like that, let me just say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, wouldn't it be good if you're driving along Mombasa Road or you're driving Thika Road or Nakuru Road, you actually had an auto bribe pay? So you just know there's a policeman standing there, and as you drive by, shwa, 1,000 bob to the policeman, pop, digital. You don't even have to stop. And if you're a lorry, instead of taking 5 days to get to Kampala, you can do it in 4. Everywhere you go, shwa, deep, shwa, deep. KRA can just collect. The policeman gets his money. He doesn't even have to get out of the car. He can get bigger and bigger. Auto bribe. It's a way of enhancing compliance. Now I'm looking here because you guys all look like KRA. I'm not sure if you're KRA people or you're coming in different disguises. But anyway. So there are many things to think about. And the data about all of these topics I have mentioned will be coming fast and furiously, and it will become more and more complicated again, with a Rwandan coming, marrying a Kenyan, buying land in Yari, and buying a Mercedes from Tanzania and selling it here, and all of the issues that come along with that. So, yeah. So let me perhaps.
Sometimes we forget that sorry. When people know technology, they forget we understand everything. But what it really means here is that we need to get into digital transformation of talking about IoT and AI. This is what he's talking about. And it's very easy to deploy now and solve many of the problems we are thinking about. We just did a paper on this, published next month, on digital transformation in this country. And we have noted on those issues.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. What we wanted to do is just turn it over to the audience to see if anybody has any questions, any comments, or any insights. So I welcome everybody to participate, not all at once, but okay, can we get a mic there, please?
Hi, good afternoon.
Could you just speak a bit louder?
Yeah, good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I have 2 questions, and I think Professor might be best placed to answer them because he kind of touched on them. One is considering the sources of big data, some of which are social media and all these other data sources that you're talking about. Are there any legal and moral questions or concerns that we should think about? Because then if you are accessing people's personal information on Twitter, on Facebook and all that, are there legal and ethical things that we should be thinking about? And as a follow-up, so the question is, some of these data sources, are they admissible? So if KRA, for example, gets my information from Twitter, use that information to prosecute me, for example, is it admissible in court and all that? Is it even right in the first place for KRA or the government to get my information from Twitter? And the follow-up question is, can we go beyond insights then with big data? Because if there are legal and ethical concerns, can we go beyond insights, just trying to get a picture? Can we go to enforcing based on these big data sources?
Actually, the platforms you're saying, those are public platforms. And I can say without doubt that with him, we created what you call sentiment analysis using what you discuss with on. You remember? Yeah. Okay. I didn't want to be the only one to say that we did this in government. You actually need to know what people in Nairobi are discussing, especially on social media. That one you do it voluntarily. I mean, it's a public platform. The risk is in like WhatsApp. You are using it at your own risk because WhatsApp makes money by selling your data. That's how they make the money. And if you understand that, then you shouldn't use it. If you don't want, then you should opt out. Google knows most of us more than our spouses know us. Because if you touch a pornography site, tomorrow morning you have 10 of them. These are the good ones, you know, and stuff. That is intrusion of privacy, but you can't take them to court. I mean, you are the one who went there in the first place to show yourself. So it is very, very difficult. Yes, it's immoral that you know too much about me. Actually, most of them, Facebook, combining WhatsApp and Facebook itself, they know you in and out. But you are the one who volunteered that information to be known. So it is like if you opt in, then the risk you are taking is that your data can be sold. And that's how they make the money. Yeah. So it's going to be very, very difficult going forward. But on telcos, I think it's different because they require that data from you, and they can't be seen to sell it, or using your communication through SMS to do other things. That would be illegal because you have a contract. I don't know about whether, do you have a contract with Facebook or? I don't know. You have to, where are you opting? So there's still a lacuna, and that's what we were debating. How do we force these people to at least tell me what they have sold to people about me? If they can be compelled. We tried once through ITU to compel that they at least pay something locally. They said you can go to hell because if today Google shuts down, you cause a revolution here. So they know their importance. They know how much they have gotten into society. And we are just hooked.
Okay.
So if I could just add to that.
Yeah.
I think what Dr. Ndemo is getting at is this whole idea of your digital identity. So 2 weeks ago, I went from here to Dubai, and we've all done this. The question is, there's data about me on the whole trip. Who owns that data? So when I left home, I called the car that comes to pick me up, sent the M-Pesa, whatever it was. The airport knew I was in there. The airplane knew I was on there. I bought duty-free. I landed. Another car picked me up, get to the hotel, boom, 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 restaurants, all of these kind of things. All of that data is out there in buckets. Who owns that? And I say it's my data. Is it really my data? Or is it bus data, airline data, hotel data, restaurant data? You can have a profile. But where this comes interesting, again, let me take my foot out of my mouth, that if I am an SME who's going on a business trip, and I'm expensing this because I'm going to a conference, but somebody goes to Facebook and sees pictures of all I am is on the beach, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. As Dr. Ndemo says, I am the one who posted it there. Now, it's not me, I didn't do this. But imagine somebody does that. Can you really deduct that trip as a business expense if the whole day long you're at a water park? So these are the challenges that come up now with these platforms, let alone the ones we were just talking about with whether your data can be sold. And in America, perhaps it's here, as Dr. Ndemo was saying, it's very clear that the phone company cannot give your records, your phone records, to anybody. And that's why they need a subpoena, they need to go get a warrant. But as these other unstructured data sources, these other companies, their whole business is about giving the data. So fundamentally a very different model there.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have? Okay, we have another question there. So we'll start there and then we'll come back here if that's okay, sir.
Professionals. My question really is, there's one part I think that was quite well raised by the doctor, that the revenue authorities are looking for third-party corroborating data that's outside the company's direct control that does it. But one of the issues for the companies, and I think you've raised it, is the companies often don't seem to have control over their own data. So a lot of times what you find in transfer pricing especially is that companies are not properly converting their financial data to tax data, not because they're doing something nefarious, but they often simply doesn't have any control. And that the way the documents are coming up, financials come first, and people are trying to unravel the financials to the tax. And then when you look at transfer pricing, the data is simply just not correlating. And what you're finding is for the companies not controlling the website. Oftentimes somebody on the website says something that's in complete defiance of the revenue authority, but oftentimes it's completely uninformed about anything. So many times the revenue authority thinks something nefarious is going on, but the company has lost control over its own data, and oftentimes people say the wrong things, they don't even know what they're saying. And I'm just wondering, you know, from a company point of view, there's been efforts to make a better data analytics internally so that the financial data is more useful. And the second problem for the revenue authority is they often don't understand the financial data that a company produces, so that the inquiries they make are wrong. And those errors not only mean they're missing the target, but it also means they're annoying the company and asking for data that's wrong. And I don't know, are we making any real progress from a company point of view?
Okay. Was that? Let me bring in Raul, because Raul, who is a digital advisor for tax authorities, he's actually worked with quite a number of tax authorities, as he said, in LATAM and Asia and now in Africa. I don't know if you have any perspective on that, and I'm happy to chime in as well.
Yes, you know, what I can say is that end of the day, companies want to comply. They need to comply in order to have a good collaboration with the government. And if you are able to be your financial information and provide that information to the government, they will understand in a more suitable way what you are doing, and you are going to have a better interaction. I have found that in a couple of countries that have implementing what is the fiscal accounting, not just electronic invoicing, but the fiscal accounting, they are sending in advance their reports of accounting because they are going to be used more effectively by the government. They are going to understand what are the kind of value-added tax that they are transferring. They are suitable for applying for refunds or credits. So what I have discovered is that when the corporations provide in advance their financial information, they are going to be more effective on getting the credits, for instance, of value-added tax. So there are more complex scenarios when the companies use the advice of other big companies that advise them on how to reduce the charge of paying taxes. I mean, legally. I mean, that is legally. And that is another space. But the space that I believe that is suitable, in terms of your question, is it is useful for both the tax authority and the companies to provide in advance your financial information. So some countries have implemented accounting online. They are sharing their accounting with the government, and they are having a more effective interaction. That is from my perspective. I don't know if some of you want to.
Anybody wants? And I just want to ask, I want us to be cognizant of time. I'm being warned that we only have 8 minutes, and I want to take the gentleman's, we have 2 gentlemen questions here, so if you want to make a brief comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a brief comment on the first point, which relates to the second question there. in terms of analyzing the big data, you've got two things, and Dr. Seville mentioned it. You get insights, and you can also get the foresights. The insights is this happened, so this has to be like this. For instance, you have analyzed the data, and you see that the taxpayer has filed an income which is incorrect, is not consistent with what you have in your analysis. For instance, the tax registers and other sources you combined, and you find that, yeah, this is supposed to be his income, and he declared differently. That's the insight that you got, and you can challenge him back. And he still have a right to come up and say, no, maybe this is income which has not been realized yet, and so forth and so forth, and you get to a point. But also, you can get a foresight that because of this, definitely this will be something that supposed to be. It's not happened yet, but it's in future this will happen. And there is something also need to be taken with a pinch that is not the correct, because for the tax, when you bill the taxpayer, you must make sure that that liability is actual, not just yes. So that's the difference, and that you can say that is a challenge which will still remain with the revenue authorities to make sure that with the tools they have on the analysis of big data, they can stand to challenge the taxpayer, whether with a predictive abilities or with the information that they know that this is for sure, this is what you have done. And I think in terms of the social media, which probably was a point there, the social media mostly provide insights about frauds, and then it becomes a trigger for the investigation. So that itself could not be admissible, that you have appeared in your Twitter doing this, or you've said this in your Twitter, but your message in your Twitter or in a Facebook can be a trigger for an investigation, which will lead into some other evidence that will be admissible to court. Likewise, the information, whether through the transfer pricing or other tax assessment, we always find that, some of the companies, they report with different regulators, and they send a different set of numbers, different information, because this regulator prefer this information this way, this one prefer this information this way. So for instance, a listed company will report to the capital market, but that is not the tax purpose. That's for financial purpose, but that information can be used by the tax authority to now rework what should have been the tax and what has been reported. And that's where sometimes the difference arises, and always is something that mitigated by getting the actual sort of data. For instance, in other jurisdictions, you get your tax returns being done by the tax authority. For you taking your car to maintenance, they report, and that their report just feed into your tax returns. At the end of the day, your tax returns is not you to prepare. It's for the tax authority to prepare and give you. And this all that's done by the complex analysis of data and give it to you. And you are given chance to object and say, no, this is not my income, this is not my expenses, but then you furnish with the evidence. That's how it works. Thank you.
I think Beatrice, you want to just make a quick comment?
I just want to make a short comment about use of third-party data from the experience of KRA. So I had mentioned that we've already integrated, we've started integrating our systems. We have the IFMIS, the financial management system of the government, integrated into iTax. And this has yielded immense kind of results. And I appreciate the legal issues involved in sharing the data, but I think we really need to work towards ensuring that the revenue authorities are able to get data from the third parties. That is the way to go in ensuring that there's compliance. Let me say what is happening. We've been able to, through connecting with the IFMIS, we've been able to identify the nil filers and the non-filers who are doing business with the county governments and other government institutions. And this is something that we had not been able to achieve before. So maybe we need to work towards ensuring that we have the right policies in place. And maybe apart from the policy, a gentleman there mentioned about ethical issues. Maybe it's also about ensuring that the data we have in our hands is data that can be, is data that can be trusted with us. So it means that we really need to build good security systems with the data that we have. So for me, that's how I look at it.
Okay. Last question before we wrap up.
Yeah, actually, it's observation, but I may want to comment. I think my last point is on what was just, my first point, what was just, made. If IFMIS systems are becoming powerful, and I can say, for Ghana, where what you need is a chart of accounts, a tax ID number, and a tax office number. And taxpayers are exposed in all their dealings with government, which is, I think the integration of tax with IFMIS, and I made this point, in Madagascar during the ATRN, I think it's a way for tax administrations as part of the fiscal system. In any event, you cannot have a complete chart of account or classification system without beginning from revenue. Because the fiscal starts with revenue, and then it's integrated with the expenditure, and that is IFMIS. So the integration of, is a very vital one. But let me, 2 quick points. Bank secrecy used to be distant to tax administrations. But when tax bases are threatened, and I believe IBM and others can back me up, when tax bases are threatened as it is today through FATCA and others, bank reporting, transactions, and whatever is open, where previously it was bad to tax administrations. And so I think that the point will come when tax bases are threatened. And then the second point example is e-commerce. In my experience, particularly with the evolution of VAT and sales taxes, in the .com era, the US was virtually protecting .com. And it was very difficult to bring e-commerce into VAT and other structures. Today, that is being, opened up. And so I think it's often a matter of time, as far as the law and tax administration, is concerned. Eventually, when governments see tax bases, being threatened, the very laws that prevented, the access to such information will be overrun.
Any other questions from the audience, or let's take one more question there. Can we get a mic up on the 4th row?
Thank you. My name is Stella Agara. I'm a governance and youth development specialist. The reason why I'm in this meeting is because I'm also the 15th laureate of the Bremen Solidarity Prize. And I was given the prize for a very unique reason. Apart from being the 4th African to receive the award, I was given the award for my work in tax justice. I'm in the business of making tax data accessible to the lowest people in the society, the youth and women. Now, when we talk about big data here, I was listening attentively to Raul when he was talking about making the data accessible to all users, especially because tax data is public data. Sometimes when we are thinking at our level, we think at a very high level and forget that the taxpayer sometimes does not understand the language you speak. And I don't mean the big things we're talking about, even the numbers we talk about. Are we able to translate 1 billion to a young person who does not even know what 1 million is? They probably have never handled 10,000, all right? Are we able to make them understand how many mountain bikes, how many market stalls, how many hospitals this kind of money is able to build for them, so that they understand why they should contribute to tax and why they should monitor how their tax is used? So let's not just talk about accessing big data for purposes of the tax agencies and maybe the national treasury to use, but also to cause the citizen to understand why they should even participate in this in the first place. If most of the times people don't participate in things they don't understand. That is one. Number two, Richard talked about something extremely important, that there's need for us to collaborate on matters of compliance, and managing fraud, and this kind of thing. You cannot do that alone when you're not engaging the fraudsters. when you're not engaging the people who are brothers and sisters of fraudsters. And if they don't understand the kind of money you're talking about, I mean, they will never be able to participate in your process. So as we try to ensure that data is accessible and we have as much data as possible and analytics to be able to make the tax system accessible, let's also think of making sure that the data is accessible to the people who actually pay tax, however small their tax is. The second level is to ensure that when we are dealing with issues of multinational corporations, we give more accessibility of that information to the rest of the taxpayers. They need to be able to understand what is happening at that higher level to see why their contribution should matter and probably what they should aspire for eventually when they become big taxpayers. I hope you get my drift.
So I think the comments around how do we make data more accessible, how do we sort of get everybody to pay their fair share, and I think from a customer engagement perspective, which I know KRA has done quite a lot of work to become much more customer-centric, customer-focused. But go ahead.
And you have a good, an excellent point. I have discovered that in many countries, most of the tax authorities are struggling on sharing the data with the citizens. And if you see what is the tax authority, how effective they are in implementing open data initiatives, they are not so good, really. The amount of information they collect, for instance, let me give you an example of a country that deploys the electronic invoicing. The electronic invoicing is basically data that is coming from the commercial operations of that the different companies are having between them, right? So that information is useful for implementing advanced analytics and detecting frauds. But at the same time, that data is also an opportunity for providing the citizen with usable data that can be used to define, for instance, what are the sources, the areas and the regions where you can put a business. If you are an entrepreneur, you would like to know what is the more suitable region, the more suitable location to start my business. Who has that data? That data is on the hands of the tax authority, in the hands of KRA. And you know, making that data available for the citizens is also an opportunity because they are going to engage with the tax authority. And that is a challenge for most of the governments to recognize that the value of data, as you mentioned, is not just for detecting bad anomalies, behaviors, but also for promoting the development of the economy. The challenge of sharing data is not easy to deal. I was talking about the question, and I'm going back to again to the question. In my country, the government have implemented the electronic accounting. That is basically the idea that the companies are enforced to send their fiscal accounting to the tax authority. What is the intention? If I can understand the accounting of the company, I can identify what are the inventories. I'm going to identify if they really have the assets and they have the operative capability or according what they are declaring. And those companies, the reason because the electronic accounting has not been deployed so much is because the private sector is not supporting that initiative because they do not feel comfortable of sharing that data. So even though there is a mandate, it's not easy to adopt by the private sector. So the big challenge is that making the data available and sharing the data is a big opportunity, not just for the companies, but also for the tax authority. It's like the entire cycle. But my experience is that if we realize that the value is in the entire change, in the entire value-added change of the process, taxpayers will be more suitable to comply if they understand what the authority is doing with the data. And that is a point.
Thank you. Okay, I think you standing there tells me that we are out of time.
Thank you. Let's put our hands together for this panel. they've done extremely well giving us insights and a lot of information on data, optimizing big data and advanced analytics as part of the process of enhancing tax administration. I think they did a wonderful job, and the moderation as well was perfect. Once again, that was the team, starting from right. That is Sebu Haile Lowell, who is the country manager of Microsoft Kenya. Next to him is there's Suleiman Asman, who is the country director, Innovation for Poverty, Africa. And right next is Richard Bade, who is former Commissioner General of Tanzania Revenue Authority. We do have Beatrice Gishoi, acting Deputy Commissioner at the KRA. And we do have my friend Raul Flores, who is an advisor, a digital advisor on tax administration. We also have Dr. Joseph Savia, who is in charge of the iLab. He's the director there at iLab at the Strathmore. Professor Bitange Ndemo from right here, University of Nairobi. And our keynote speaker, who deserves another very warm round of applause for a very good opening to this session. That's Nick Nesbitt, who is the general manager of IBM. Let's clap for him. I thought he made a good presentation. And I want to thank the audience for very active participation. I was fearing more of you would want to take part in this conversation, and I'm glad only a few ended up, but that's not to say those who did not speak were not willing to participate. In the afternoon, in about less than an hour from now, we'll have the official opening session. And the official opening session will include remarks from the Commissioner General of the KRA, John Giraine. We'll also have remarks by Dr. Mohamed Omar, who is Commissioner of Strategy and Innovation, is here with us. There'll also be a number of other speakers, including the chairperson of the board of the Kenya Revenue Authority, Dr. Edward Sambili. And that will come to us in less than an hour from now, which is why I'll request you to very diligently manage time as we go out for lunch. Lunch is served right outside this auditorium. Please have your meal as fast as you can, and let's converge here at 5 minutes to 2 o'clock so that we can be able to get into the official opening session. Thank you very much. See you shortly.